Wow. Oh my God. The late summer school 2022. You know, guys, this event, it has a history. About 9 years ago, some guys met under a palm tree in the exotic land of Styria in a living room, to mention. Okay. But you know what, Matthias? Einstein was dreaming about riding a sunbeam.
The guys in this story, actually, they dreamt of riding a sound beam, an ultrasound beam, to be precise.
Okay, this is not the story of an LSD trip. This is the story of four medical students trying to figure out how a ultrasound machine works.
It definitely took some time. Before the leaves turned gray, they figured out not just how to scan each other, but to teach, so that every student could get it and would be able to do a scan by themselves.
We are the next generation, and we feel honored to stand here in front of you today and present you the basics of ultrasound imaging. Matthew, what are actually the first experiences with ultrasound you can remember?
Well, Romeo, actually, the first experience I remember, it was on my first clinical rotation. I was looking over the shoulder of an experienced doctor, and I actually saw a gray picture. I didn't recognize anything, and I got very confused. How was your first experience?
Well, as I don't remember being a fetus and being scanned on the machine, my first experience actually has been at the summer school here. I think it was in the year 2017, and it was great. But still, at some points, I got quite confused, and it was a little bit stressful at the machine. So our aim of that presentation now is to give you a smooth entrance into the hands-on sessions, actually, and into the practice. Yeah. What are we going to talk about today, Matthias?
I think we will start with the technical basics, because we need to understand how an ultrasound machine is working, how an image is generated. Then we will come to artifacts, because they are not only an obstacle in our imaging process, but they can be quite helpful, as you will experience.
I agree. And I think it's also important to talk about handling at some point, and also to talk about orientation in an image, because it can be confusing. And finally, we also want to make a point about practical application in clinical context, because that's where you will end up.
We prepared a question for you now. Please take out your phones, scan that QR code, or go to menti.com, type in that number, and afterwards we will show you the question. Yeah, you can give us some hearts. Awesome. So, our question actually is, what do you associate when you're thinking of ultrasound, or if you're thinking of using ultrasound?
A lot of people already want to give diagnosis, someone to make babies.
Someone are pregnant.
So I think the vibe is already quite good at that point. Wow. I think also people from the live view are participating, because there's a lot of words. Awesome.
Thank you so much. Now Romeo will tell us what was our experience or our association with ultrasound when we are brainstorming for this presentation.
So our association was actually these little animals that had a little bad reputation in the last years, but we still adore them because they are the inventors of ultrasound. Even if you blind them, a bat by emitting ultrasound waves and receiving them with their huge ears, they would find their way along, of course.
But we actually can do the same thing as bats can do. Just imagine a thunderstorm and you want to know how far is it away. What do? Right, you just count the seconds after you see the lightning and then divide it by 3 and you know how many kilometers away the thunderstorm is. Exactly that is what an ultrasound machine is doing. It's just counting the seconds.
Or the milliseconds.
Or the milliseconds.
Sound waves have different speed in different media. In air, it's actually quite slow. In liquids, next, they are much faster. And in body tissues, the velocity of sound waves is close to the speed of sound waves in water. And at that point, we want to bring in one term. The term is impedance. And impedance, non-academically spoken, is the ability of a tissue of letting penetrate the ultrasound wave. So, sometimes when, for instance, we put a transducer or an ultrasound probe on our body and the ultrasound wave is going through, you would have a change between different tissues and a change between the impedance. So we call that an impedance step. And now we have a question for you. What do you guys think that happens when you have an impedance step? It's a question for the phone, of course. Okay.
All right, we are quite clear here.
Yeah. Number 3, most got it right. If you have an impedance step, you get a strong reflection. And you need that reflection to create an ultrasound image with your probe, because you need some waves to receive. So, in this example image, we want to show again a practical example of impedance jump. You have water and you have air. And if you remember, maybe in your holidays, you've been diving in the water. And even if someone's quite close, but outside of the water, speaking to each other, you won't hear them because of the impedance step, because of the reflection. But if a ship is making noise, even if it's far away, you would hear it quite clear.
Okay.
We made that point clear so far.
So now we already know how sound waves behave inside of the tissue. Now we need to know how sound waves are actually generated. You all know that principle from your lighter, because an ultrasound machine is based out of crystals and out of a stopwatch. And we start with the crystals now. They are actually in your lighter, and when you press the button, you all know a flame is coming. This works in both directions. So if we apply a current, an electrical current, to a crystal, it starts swinging and it's emitting an ultrasound wave. But if an ultrasound wave comes back to the crystal, again it's swinging, but now it is emitting an electrical current. And you can see that on the next slide. And here comes the stopwatch. When the ultrasound beam is emitted, the machine just starts a stopwatch and is counting the seconds. But now, when we hit a structure in the depth with our sound beam, there's an echo happening because you already know there's an impedance step happening. And now our machine tells us how this works when the echo was coming in. So now we know how deep the structure is located inside of the tissue.
So, Matthias, I really like your video. I think it's great. But let me ask you a completely other question. If you really want to annoy your neighbor and you have music running in your flat, would you turn up the bass line or would you raise the volume of the high tones?
Well, Romeo, as Georgie already introduced me, I'm a nice person first time. But
Obviously.
if I really want to annoy my neighbor, I was thinking of putting up the bass line. But Romeo, why are you asking me this? What does this have to do with ultrasound?
Everything. Because as you want to penetrate the walls deeper with lower frequencies, we do the same in ultrasound. We use different frequencies. So as you see in this image, if we use a very low frequency, we would penetrate deeply into the tissue and get a huge picture. And if you take a higher frequency, we would not penetrate very well. And yeah, so maybe at that point you may ask, why to use a high frequency? We need it because it's not just absorbed stronger, it also gives more detailed reflections of smaller structures. And by that, it gives us a higher resolution. So, as I mentioned now, we have different probes. Matthias, could you give us a little introduction into the different kinds of ultrasound probes?
Of course, Romeo. We have 3 different probes we will be using frequently. Our first probe is our linear one. As you can see, we have a lot of crystals close to each other, sending out a very high frequency. So we penetrate not that deep, only a few centimeters, but we will get back a very high resolution. And we can use that for scanning vessels, for example, on the neck, as you can see in this picture. Our next probe is our curved probe. As you can see, we have a convex contact space or contact area. Again, we have a lot of crystals close to each other, but due to the convex surface, the sound beams, they are diverging in the deep, which is why we get quite a big image. And as we are using not that high frequency as for the linear probe, we would get a deep view inside of the body. And maybe we can use that for the abdomen. For example, if we want to scan the kidney. Our last probe actually is the most difficult one or complicated one. We have only a small contact area. And as you can see, we have only one crystal with quite a low frequency. So we get very deep inside of the tissue. But this crystal is special because it can move upwards and downwards, which is why we still get quite a big image. Romeo, can you imagine on which body surface should we use that kind of probe?
Small contact surface, image. Well, I guess the rib cage can be quite an obstacle.
Exactly, because we can't scan through the ribs. We need to take an intercostal space. We need a small contact area, but we want to see the whole heart, right? This is why we're using the phased array. On this picture, you can actually see how these probes look in real life, but I think you will get to know them over the next days, but actually today. Now, again, we have a question prepared.
Oh yeah, I think it was, whose tutor of Sonography's body was this painting made of?
Romeo, Romeo.
I confused it again, sorry.
Changed the question, actually. So, we want to know what probe would you use to scan which area?
Ah, yeah, I remember. Sorry, I'm a little bit confused. I would say that looks quite good.
Yes, most of you, or almost everybody, got it right.
I already noticed that far more people already have ultrasound experience than it was back in 2017 at these events. But now we will come to another very important basic slide. It's about the orientation. And it's extremely important to talk about that because it can get confusing. And this is for your first hands-on session. With every image, first thing you do is orientate yourself. So I think it's easy. It's easy to figure out what is close to the probe and what is far away from the probe. And depending on the probe's position, this could be lateral and medial, or anterior or posterior. But when you come to the sides of the image, it can be a little bit complicating. Is it up or down, or right or left? I have no idea. So what helps you with that is a little element on the probe, a little marking that we have symbolized here, and we call it the nose. And it correlates to this dot in the image. So always just look, where is my nose and where is the dot at the image? Nose up, where the dot is up. And that's very easy way to think about it. But people can get quite confused about it. So
now we want to talk about terminology to describe the actual ultrasound picture. Romeo, how would you describe that one?
And while that, we welcome Vale and Andy on stage. Thank you very much for coming. So at that point of our presentation, looking at this picture, I would say it looks like the weather report for Graz in November, just everything grayish.
Okay, I have to give you that one, but that is why we want to introduce some terms. And we put arrows here. We will start with the orange one. As you can see, it's a black structure, which means we do not get any echo from this one, which is why we call it unechogenic. The green arrow points to an area which is where already a bit of echo is coming back, but it's still quite dark, right? So we will call that hypoechogenic. And the blue arrow, instead, it shows us a very bright area, which is why? Because we got very much echo on this point, which is why we call that one hyperechogenic.
Matthias, I see 2 blue arrows at the screen.
True, Romeo, which is why we have another term. If we want to compare different colors or different organs inside the body, we need to compare the echogenicity, which is why we have the term isoechogenic.
Great. So in the 2-dimensional normal section, we call it also the B image, the B mode image. We already got the basics now. And I think for some of you it was a repetition. Now we want to present you 2 other imaging modes that are important and that you will also see within the next 2 days. So, as our demonstrators show, if we switch now to the ultrasound image, you can see a heart pumping there. And this little donut you see in the middle, it's actually the chamber of the left heart. So if we want to quantify the movement and the contraction, it's very useful to use the M mode. And for the M mode, you can see we put an axis into the heart, into our cut. And now try to imagine what it looks like to have just the picture points of this axis projected over time. And you will see that now. And as we freeze, you try to imagine this is a great image to make measurements and to quantify precisely movements of our tissues. So again, so you don't fall asleep, we have prepared a question. Thank you very much to our colleagues, Vale and Andy. Andy gave his last shirt for us. So the question we have is, we brought you some examples and you can choose various of them which you think that the M mode is an analysis mode that makes sense for this tissue. And you can choose various. And we are aware that this is not a very easy question.
But it seems for most of you, it's actually an easy question.
Okay, we will resolve it. So 3 choices were right. The excursion of a mitral valve leaflet, you do it actually in a very similar section. The vena cava proximal to the heart, you saw that in the presentation before actually. It can collapse a lot. And the lung sliding of pleural layers. Why not the pulsation of the carotid artery? The pulsation of the carotid artery is very little movement actually in the image. And the peristaltic movement, well, it's a slow movement. So it's not, and also we would not have any question to quantify it. So the M mode is also called, or the M stands for motion. It's the motion mode. And we use it when we have a lot of motion in a short time, and also when the question makes sense. You will see this mode again within the next 2 days.
Our next image technique is the Doppler effect. You all know the Doppler effect from an arriving ambulance, which has a high-pitched horn. When it passing you by, the horn pitches lower, right? You all know that. Our ultrasound machine also is capable of calculating the Doppler effect or measuring the Doppler effect from passing erythrocytes, which is why through that technique, we do not see only the anatomic picture, but we can add up the physiology. As you can see, we are scanning the vessels and we can visualize the flow inside of them. For example, for the carotid artery. So we would use rather the Doppler for the carotid artery than the M mode. For even more information, we could also derive a stream profile from this artery. But we do not want to go that deep into detail now. You will learn that later and probably also some afterwards the summer school. So we want to proceed with artifacts.
So we will just go to the most important artifacts. And as we've already mentioned, artifacts are not just an obstacle in our image, are not just an error, they're also something that can help us with diagnosis. First artifact we want to talk about is the reverberation artifact. So you see here an ultrasound beam coming into the body, and we have various switches of tissue, various impedance steps. So at those steps, some beams are reflected strongly, some would penetrate. And it can happen that the ultrasound beams stay between some impedance steps and come back to the probe later. And as our machine is only measuring time difference, it thinks that the echo is coming from deeper structures. So we have various reflection lines. And we will show you an example of that, which you probably also will see again on Sunday, I think, or even tomorrow. This is a reverberation you see inside the lung. So you won't recognize this pattern now, but this is the lung, and you see at the surface, you see the skin, and deeper you see the pleural. And between the skin and the pleural, you have this echogenic, these echoes moving, so you get the projections deeper in the lung tissue.
Our next artifact is the mirror artifact, and it works similar. Again, we are emitting a sound beam from our probe. It travels into the deep. It hits the diaphragm, and from there, it's reflected, but not back upwards, but into the liver. Inside of the liver, it's hitting probably some vessels. From there, it's reflected backwards to the diaphragm, backwards, up to the probe. Our ultrasound machine is quite stupid, as it just counts the seconds. It shows us the vessel of the liver and actually liver tissue inside or behind the diaphragm, where the lung is supposed to be. You can see that in this picture. You see liver, you see a vessel inside of the liver, you see the diaphragm, and you see exactly this vessel behind the diaphragm as well.
So the next artifact is a little bit more simple. It's the acoustic shadowing. We see this black, this black area, which gives a strong echo and which does not let the sound beams penetrate. So behind the black area, whatever structure it is, we cannot get any echo. So we have a shadow there. We have anechoic structure. So this is a very useful artifact, as we see in the next image, because it can help us to find stones. I mean, this is a very obvious picture of a gallstone. I mean, it's huge. But even if you see a small gallstone, you would see the shadow pointing at the stone as an arrow telling you, here is the stone.
Our last artifact we want to cover is the acoustic enhancement artifact, and it works just vice versa than the shadowing. Again, we can see the gallbladder, but this time without a stone inside of it. So, as we already know, fluids do not give us any reflection, which is why they are unechogenic, which is why more sound waves relative to the area next to it are penetrating into the deep, which is why this area seems more bright in the image. Now, we have a question prepared for you. Actually, how many artifacts can you recognize in this image?
Maybe it's helpful to have a look at the screens because you have better resolution.
Quite clear again.
It's another hard question.
Actually, it is a hard question because two artifacts are probably kind of easy for you because we use the same image for the mirror artifact. And probably most of you also recognized the acoustic enhancement behind of the gallbladder. But there are two more artifacts in this picture actually. On the left side, you can see a big part which is unechogenic, where we see just black. This is because there's a shadowing artifact behind the rib, because we are close to the rib cage. And up close to the probe, we see some small reverberations. It's quite hard to see, but if you recognize at least two or even three, it's very good.
Okay, the good thing is we are not in an exam situation. So today we've already heard quite some advantages of ultrasound as a method. And one of these advantages is that you are very free in your movements. If you want to create an image, you are not limited to the anatomic planes, the sagittal, the frontal, and the transversal plane, like in a CT or in an MRI scan. And you can get a moving image. But so, for instance, you can make a better image of the longitudinal axis of the kidneys, which are not coping to an anatomic axis, or the pancreatic gland. But so if we look at the next picture, you are kind of an athlete that can jump through the air and make a salto and a screw at a time. But it took a lot of time for this athlete to get where he is. And probably on the way he hurt sometimes. And also in the ultrasound imaging, it's a little disadvantage because all this flexibility and freedom, it makes it a little bit hard to orient at the beginning, to know where you are, and you can really get lost easily. So we give you one advice at that point. Get aware of the kinds of movement you have and always do just one kind of movement by the time, and then the other, and do slow movements. So I would ask you to show us the kinds of movements that we use to explain and to assist to our students in the classes.
I will do, but I think at first we need a voluntary.
All right. So, it's already some 20 minutes of presentation, and we need a little break, and we need a little help of you. Anyone who would voluntarily come with us on stage and help us with the next step. Please. Nothing will happen. Don't worry. We won't harm you. We will help you. Yeah, please come with me. Great. Give an applause. What's your name?
Jana. Jana.
Jana. An applause for Jana. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jana.
Okay, Jana.
We will introduce 5 movements for you. Romeo has prepared a big rope for you.
Maybe you need 2 hands. Okay, come to this side. With 2 hands. Here.
Okay, maybe point downwards.
Yeah, please.
And have it like this.
In
I
front.
don't have like. Okay, Jana. The first movement we want to do, it's a rocking movement. So keep the probe like this and just angulate it a bit to the left and a bit to the right. Nice. Our next movement is a fanning movement. So again, take it like this and just angulate it a bit forward and a bit backward. Great. Now we have 2 sliding movements. Just point downwards. And the first sliding movement is in plane. So just go a bit to the left and to the right. Nice. Now a sliding movement out of plane. So a bit forward and a bit backward. You're already there. Our last movement is a rotating movement where we keep the like this, but rotate it along its own axis. I see it's kind of easy for you. So we are ready for level 2.
So we have fanning, rocking, sliding in plane, out of plane, and rotating. I think to get a little bit more interesting, now we should blindfold you.
We take care of you. No worries.
Medical students have big heads.
That's, yeah.
Okay, Jana. Would you please follow my instructions? So hold the probe a little bit higher, please. Yeah, like that, it's great. So now I ask you to do a slide in plane to the left side. Okay, make a step to the left side. Okay, a little bit back with the probe. Like to the right side, Yeah, there we are. Okay. So now please make a sliding movement to the front. One more step. Yeah, slowly. Yeah, a little bit more. You're doing great. Step. It's awesome. You do perfect. Okay. So next, do a little rocking movement. Yeah, stop. Yeah, perfect. Like that. I think it's good. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now do a little rotation. Clockwise. Stop. Perfect. And finally a fanning movement. And the other way. Yeah, exactly. More. And stop. Okay. We unfold you. Jana, this was the first scan of her heart. Give an applause to Jana.
Take that one.
Thank you very much, Jana. We have a heart for you. Okay, thank you very much.
What do you think of this picture? What do you think of this picture now?
What does it have to do with ultrasound?
You can tell me, Romeo, actually. Please describe this picture to us, especially the anechogenic structure.
Oh, well, I think it may be a scan of the liver.
True.
And this anechoic structure, it may be, well, it may be a cyst or a vessel in the cross section or the duodenum in a quite clear state. But I would not be sure.
How can you be sure, Romeo? You would probably take another perspective, right?
Totally true. Okay, now I see. Obvious. It's the gallbladder. So what we take from this image is it's always very important if you want a precise image of the place. You need different angles. And in the Optimus case, you have the longitudinal and a cross section. Okay.
Now we come to control. This is our ultrasound machine. Looks quite complicated, right? It reminds all of us, maybe, on our old remote control we are used from our TV. How many of these buttons did you actually ever used? Not that much, probably, right? The good thing is there's an easy alternative because we only need 3 buttons. Same for an ultrasound device. We need just a freeze button, which when we are looking for a structure and we are finding it, just hit that freeze button. The image stops and we can analyze it. We can also turn up or turn out the gain, which is to make the image more bright or more dark, which we need to use if we are maybe in a very bright area, or we can see better contrasting. And last but not least, we have to adjust the depth, because if we are looking for a very deep structure, of course, we need to adjust it and give our device more depth. We did the same thing with our ultrasound machine, and you can do it with every ultrasound machine. We only need these buttons. Actually, now there are 4, but we need to turn it on and off. That's the 4th one.
So we're trying to bring in a little bit of the clinical context. And I think this image itself is speaking for itself. Ultrasound probes and machines are getting smaller, and they are always available, and you can do bedside ultrasound. You can always have it. But for the most important is to do a lot of scans in healthy individuals and really understand the anatomy and physiologic cut sections. But when you do your first approaches in a clinical setting, which also will be very soon, you should at the beginning cope to easy questions that you ideally can answer with a yes or no. This has also been mentioned before as point of care focus ultrasound. So is there liquid? Yes or no? Is there a stone? Yes or no? And then there is also another concept we want to bring you. In our last part, it's the 5 Ps that Gregor Brosen brought in a few years ago at this event. The 5 Ps are purpose, probe, position, picture, and patient care integration. So before you do a scan of a patient, always be aware of the purpose. Why am I doing this? When you start with the examination, first you think, which one is the best probe? How do I have to position the patient? Sometimes it's good to put him at the side. And finally, have an image in your head already. What should the picture look like? And use the depth, use the gain button to optimize the picture. And finally, think about what consequences does it have? It's the patient care integration. What are the consequences? And we brought a very simple example. Patient comes, he couldn't pee since one day, no abdominal pain. So the question is, and the purpose, does he have a block? And as we do the probe, as we do the scan of the lower abdomen, and we have to go quite deep, we would take a curve or an abdominal probe. We would position the patient lying dorsally and adjust the picture. And the consequences are, if the bladder is full, he will get a catheter. So in this case, it totally makes sense to do an ultrasound. The more complicated the situation, the more important to get back to this simplified concept. And one more thing we wanted to show you. The little blue square, that is you. That is you now and with your skills of ultrasound. White, the white square, that is your idea of ultrasound. And very soon, the blue will get bigger and you will get quite confident. But the closer, the more you fill up the white square, you will also get aware that ultrasound is bigger. And it's really important not to use confidence, go on, but to practice a lot and stay humble in the process.
We will leave it at that point. We have 3 take-home messages for you. Stick to the basics, build up from them. Your mindset always matters, and try to cope to a structured procedure like the 5 Ps.
And also have fun when you do ultrasound. And at that point, before we thank you, we want to mention that within the last years, every year there was a Sono Basics presentation here. And we want to thank the guys that did it before because, of course, we took a lot of concepts that were developed within the last years. And we also took some slides. We took some slides from our colleagues, developed from our colleagues from Sono for You. And thank you especially to Simon Orlob and David Burkharthofer, who did this presentation in the last years. And thanks to every one of you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Wow, what an awesome lecture. Thank you so much. First of all, are there questions from the audience or from social media? Don't be shy. All right. In that case, I have 2 questions. Question number 1. This was a lecture just about the basics of sonography, and yet it was so much information. And you came to it in the last slide, but I wanted to ask you, how long did it take you to become that skilled in ultrasounds that you could use it basically without thinking?
I think a little bit of thinking always is included inside of the process, but you start, everything is a lot of information, and you will remember the basics and you will try to build up from this, which is why we did it like this detailed. So you have like a strong basis you can start from.
Well, I would go with our statement, stay humble. And I think we both are very humble with our skills. But it's extremely important to always be aware of the basics, because sometimes you watch people who are very experienced but are not aware of certain things they see because they have not so much knowledge about the basics.
Yes, I've had that impression many times in my rotations. The second question that I had is, well, just I wanted to ask you for some advice for our participants. Could you break it down to one essential thing? How do you become a good sonographer?
Work hard and question yourself and discuss the images.
And stay interested.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was incredible. Big applause.